moon hung high in the star-studded sky, casting a silver glow over the land. The peaceful stillness of the night seemed almost too perfect, like a picture you might hang on a wall. But in the shadows of that serene evening, trouble was brewing. As the light winds whispered through the cornfields, a pair of dark figures crept closer to a secluded barn, their motives hidden behind masks of deceit. Henry, the farmer, stood beneath a ceiling of stars, checking on his cattle, unaware of the darkness drawing near. He had spent decades on this land, hard work and sweat woven into every inch of the field he called home. The barn, with its weathered wooden planks and rusted tin roof, was more than just a shelter for his animals. It was a sanctuary of his past and a fortress of his dreams. But tonight, that sanctuary was about to face an unexpected threat. Moments later, a soft scraping sound disturbed the serenity. It was as subtle as a whisper, but for Henry, it was enough to send a chill racing down his spine. He stopped, listening more intently. Sounds can betray you, they can weave tales of danger, and something in his gut was telling him to pay attention. The shadows shifted as the two intruders fumbled with the barn door, cursing under their breath. They thought they could creep in unnoticed, but Henry was no stranger to the unpredictability of the night. He turned toward the barn, his heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins. This wasn't just some petty break-in. This was his home, and he wasn't going to let anything threaten it. Henry had spent his life protecting what was his. With the instincts of a seasoned farmer, he thought quickly. He ducked behind a stack of hay bales, their rough fibers mixing with the scent of fresh grass. The intruders were inside now, rummaging through his tools, oblivious to the coiled spring of determination ready to burst. The first man was tall, wearing a hood that shadowed his face. His companion was shorter, flicking a flashlight back and forth. The beam cut through the darkness like a strobe, casting eerie shapes across the barn's interior, jumbled machinery, old farming equipment, and dusty overhead rafters. It was their first time here, but Henry knew every rafter, every tool, and every crevice like the lines on his weathered hands. They laughed as they scoured through crates filled with equipment, but Henry wasn't laughing. Instead, he focused on the sounds around him, piecing together their movements. He could feel his heart pounding in rhythm with the creaking barn floor, a percussion to accompany this silent standoff. Then they grew impatient. The tall one grumbled, frustration dripping from his voice. Henry's eyes narrowed. The back room held supplies, grain sacks, and most importantly, his tools, his lifeline. If they got their hands on those, they could cause chaos, and chaos in the wrong hands spelled disaster. With a rush of resolve, Henry decided it was time to act. He thought back to his training, the lessons learned while working on the farm. Survival was often about being resourceful, quick thinking, and using the environment to your advantage. He scanned the barn one last time and noticed the pitchfork leaning against the wall, a simple yet effective tool. It was the kind of weapon that had served him well over the years, whether in the fields or keeping the livestock in line. It was time to be the defender of his property. Silently, Henry grabbed the pitchfork, its wooden handle cool against his palm. With the precision of a seasoned veteran, he crept toward the back room where he could hear the intruders mumbling and kicking aside grain bags. The tension crackled in the air, an electric charge that ignited his senses. And then, just as the shorter man swung open the back room door, Henry lunged forward, a swift blur against the stillness of the barn. He thrust the pitchfork forward, prodding at the man, who stumbled back in surprise, a terrified yelp escaping his lips. The tall man shouted, turning to face Henry, his bravado quickly replaced by horror. Panic erupted as they realized the stakes had changed. Henry said, voice steady, cutting through the shock. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a protector, someone who fought not just for land but for a legacy. His eyes burned with determination, a fire ignited by years of hard work and pride. The intruders exchanged frantic glances, weighing their options. The tall man hesitated, trying to regain his composure. "We didn't want any trouble, old man," he retorted, but the shake in his voice betrayed him. Henry tightened his grip on the pitchfork, taking a step closer. "This is my land, you need to leave." Shock transformed into aggressive bravado. The tall man, fueled by desperation, lunged forward, attempting to disarm Henry. But it was too late. Henry had spent his life among these tools, every movement rehearsed through tireless practice, born of necessity. With a swift twist, he redirected the thrust, using the pitchfork to block and push back. The intruders faltered, their confidence draining with each precise move Henry made. They had underestimated him, the quiet farmer who knew these lands like the back of his hand. Just then the barn doors creaked open. A sudden gust of wind swept in, carrying the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats. Henry's heart raced. It was his trusty horses, startled by the ruckus. The intruders turned, their eyes wide. In that moment of distraction, Henry seized the opportunity. "Get out!" he shouted, all the authority of the land behind his voice. Startled, the two men scrambled toward the doors, eyes darting between Henry and their escape route. With one swift motion, they knocked over a stack of feed bags as they stumbled backward, creating a small cloud of grain that enveloped the barn in a white haze. Henry took his chance, closing the distance as they struggled to regain their footing. Aimed perfectly, he leveled the pitchfork sudden, menacing. The intruders' bravado dissolved into panic. They dashed toward the door, barely making it outside before the weight of their choices slammed behind them. Adrenaline pumping through their veins, they slipped into the night, fleeing into the darkness that had seemingly offered them refuge moments before. Breathing heavily, Henry leaned against the barn wall, trying to collect himself. He could hear the fading footsteps, echoing against the still night. Still, the air pulsed with tension, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. And then there was silence, a heavy, consuming silence that settled onto the land like a heavy blanket. He stepped outside, looking at the moonlit fields that had shielded his sanctuary from chaos. The stars twinkled above as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. His ancestors' spirits whispered through the grain, swaying softly in the breeze. They had fought for freedom, for their homes, and now he had done the same. A wave of exhaustion crashed over him, but beneath it simmered a warmth, a sense of victory. This was his place, his history carved into the land, and he would do anything to protect it. As he walked back into the barn, Henry felt renewed purpose. The shadows still flickered, but they no longer felt threatening. Instead, they were a reminder, a symbol of defense and resilience. He had met darkness head-on and emerged stronger, a guardian in a world that could sometimes feel like it preyed on the vulnerable. That night, as he closed the barn doors and locked them tight, Henry knew that the fight would always exist. Every man, every woman, every farmer had stories of standing firm against the tide. The world was unpredictable, yes, but he was ready, aware, and resolute, a true keeper of the land, because while the shadows may come creeping, the light of determination will always shine brighter. The night was thick with silence, the kind that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. In the distance, the faint sound of crickets buzzed in harmony with the rustle of wind through the cornfields. Few would have imagined anything could disturb this tranquil setting, but beneath the surface, darkness had a different plan. Out in the heart of the countryside, a small barn stood resolute against the looming shadows. It was here that Jacob, the farmer, had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into every beam, every nail. This barn wasn't merely a structure. It had absorbed the essence of his life, every moment of triumph and struggle. On this dark night, however, the peace was about to shatter. Just as the clock struck midnight, two figures crept along the gravel path leading to the barn. They moved furtively, shadows slipping through the darkness. Dressed in dark clothing, they had one goal in mind: to break in and grab whatever they could find. They whispered in hushed tones, aware that every sound echoed their intentions. "Just grab what you can find and let's get out of here," the taller one hissed. Jacob, a man of routine, had long been a creature of habit. He had just settled in for the night, but a nagging feeling pulled at him. He had always been attuned to the noises of the farm, and tonight felt off. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped out of his modest house, scanning the area. That's when he noticed them. His heart raced as he watched the intruders approach the barn, their movements jerky and anxious. With every cautious step, the ground crunched beneath them. Jacob's instincts kicked in. He was a protector, trained by years of farm life to defend what was his. He dashed quietly around the far side of the barn, heart pounding like a war drum. Behind the barn was a small storage shed, filled with tools and equipment. The light from his flashlight flickered undeniably, illuminating stacked old wood and rusted metal. As misfortune would have it, he made no noise, but the flashes of light caught the thieves' attention. The shorter one whispered, eyes darting. His partner snapped back, but the fear was palpable in their voices. They tightened their grips on crowbars, their confidence wavering. In that moment, Jacob felt ready. He had lived through storms, droughts, and even the occasional coyote skirmish. But this wasn't the weather. It was something darker, and it filled him with a fiery resolve. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the shed, a tool that could do more than just fix machinery. It could defend his territory. As the intruders pried open the barn door, Jacob moved into direct position. The creak of the old barn door echoed like a gunshot in the still air, a signal for the dark intentions now bearing down on him. Jacob could feel his pulse echoing in his ears. Inside, chaos erupted, as they began rummaging through tools and supplies. But Jacob was no longer watching from the shadows. It was time to act. With a deep breath, he burst through the door, brandishing the wrench. He shouted, a roar that surprised even himself. The faces of the intruders turned pale. They hadn't factored in resistance. The tall one stammered, his bravado melting away. Jacob shouted, his voice ringing with authority. In the dim light of the barn, the tension grew thicker. Every second stretched, and the shadows morphed into something almost alive. The taller intruder's eyes darted back to his partner, panic switching the gears of their minds. Jacob, standing firmly, felt a surge of power. He had lived for years in this place, and to him, it was more than just land, it was home. The shorter one finally broke and made a run for the door, but Jacob was faster than he looked. He lunged, gripping the intruder by the wrist, swinging him back against the wall. Jacob growled, the resolve in his voice more potent than any threat. The chaos escalated. The tall intruder charged toward Jacob, swinging the crowbar with a wild ferocity. Time seemed to slow as Jacob narrowly dodged the swing. Fast on his feet, he used every ounce of energy to sidestep and land a firm knee against the man's stomach. It forced the air from his lungs, and just like that, the intruder stumbled back, shocked by the farmer's surprising tenacity. Jacob shouted, his hand tightening around the wrench. The barn filled with confusion. Fear weighed heavy in the air as the reality of their situation sank in. They were not facing just a victim. They were confronting a determined defender of the land. Jacob could feel his adrenaline spike. What would they do? Would they attack again, or was fear transforming their bravado into panic? The tall guy started to retreat, his partner staggering back with him, the fire they had entered the barn with extinguished. He urged, sweat glistening on his forehead, but Jacob wasn't finished. He took a step closer. He shouted, rising up to the challenge, each word laced with a fierce protective instinct. Both intruders exchanged frantic glances before bolting toward the door, fear now overpowering their greed. Jacob tightened his grip on the wrench, unwilling to back down. As they stepped outside, he burst after them, his voice a booming warning against the night sky. Leave. They didn't need to be told twice. Stumbling over each other, they sprinted off into the darkness, the light from the barn fading behind them. Their legs pumped furiously, propelled by a raw instinct to escape the power of the very land they had attempted to invade. Finally, Jacob watched as they disappeared into the night, adrenaline still coursing through him. Every breath felt electric, the fight for his home igniting something deep within. The night stood silent again, but the echoes of their confrontation shimmered in the air. Still gripping the wrench, Jacob leaned against the barn door, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him. A deep breath filled his lungs, and he exhaled slowly, allowing the tension to seep away. As the moon hung high in the sky, casting silver light across the fields, Jacob knew he had defended not just a structure but a piece of himself. The barn, with its cracked wooden planks and creaking beams, held stories of resilience, his stories. Moments later, he finally allowed himself to smile, a proud expression mixed with relief. He had been ready. And maybe this was a lesson the intruders would never forget, a reminder that the heart of a farmer beats strong and fierce, willing to protect what is cherished with every ounce of strength. He stepped back inside, locking the door behind him, that familiar sense of calm settling around him once more. The animals in the barn stirred slightly, but sensing the farmer's presence, they settled back down. He took a moment to gather himself, shaking off the adrenaline still lingering in his body. As he looked around the barn, the familiar sense of hay and wood enveloped him. This place was his sanctuary, and it had withstood challenges before. Jacob knew the night was far from over, but the battle was behind him. And with every challenge faced, he learned something valuable. The world outside held uncertainty, but he could stand firm, ready for whatever came next. And the lando, it breathed alongside him, mingling with memories of late nights, long days, and the beauty of hard-earned tranquility. He felt grateful. All those years of labor and love had prepared him well. As the moon illuminated the barn's interior, Jacob reached for a shovel, ready to tidy up the mess left behind after the confrontation. He would secure his barn, build its defenses, and go to sleep knowing no one could take away his legacy. The night had cast shadows, but those shadows only filled him with a greater appreciation for the light. He had stood up for what was his, and in doing so, he had also discovered a deeper part of himself. The farmer wasn't just a caretaker of crops and livestock. He was a guardian of history, a bulwark against darkness. With a heart still racing, he put one last look toward the now quiet fields, and under the gentle glow of the moon, Jacob knew he would always be ready. No matter what came next, he would stand at the door of the barn, strong as oak, ready to defend the life he cherished. The deep hush of the night wrapped around the farm like a soft quilt, every sound amplified in the stillness. Crickets chirped in a rhythmic symphony, blending with the rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the fields. An owl hooted in the distance, its haunting call a reminder of nature's calm. But beneath this veneer of tranquility, a storm was brewing, cloaked in shadows that flickered along the edges of the barn. It was just past midnight when two figures emerged from the tree line, stepping cautiously over the dew-kissed grass. They looked like shadows themselves, dressed in dark clothes that blended seamlessly into the night. Their eyes flicked nervously from side to side as they approached the old barn, breath quickening with anticipation and anxiety. They had one objective in mind: to strip the barn of its valuables. Inside, the farmer, Sam, was well aware that something was amiss. He had spent a lifetime establishing this farm, a labor of love passed down through generations. Each beam of the barn whispered stories of hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. Sam knew this land and its rhythms like the back of his hand. He could sense when something was out of place, and now his instincts screamed danger. Just moments before the figures reached the barn doors, Sam lay awake, a tangle of thoughts clouding his mind, a heavy mantle of weariness draped over him. His day had been long and challenging, tending to the crops and livestock with love and dedication. Yet, something tugged at him, an undeniable gut feeling that had him tossing and turning. Finally, he threw off the covers, the chill of the room sending a shiver down his spine. He slipped on his worn boots and grabbed a flashlight from the bedside table, illuminating the path ahead as he made his way toward the barn. Heart pounding, he stepped outside, taking in the crisp air that filled his lungs. The moonlit barn stood solid before him, yet in the periphery, he noticed the dark figures creeping closer, their intentions cloaked in secrecy. "Hey," he demanded, voice steady yet low, the kind that commanded authority. The figures froze, heads snapping toward him. For a brief moment, their eyes widened in shock, but instead of retreating, they smirked, emboldened by bravado. "We're just here for a few trinkets, old man," the taller one said, his tone dripping with mockery. But Sam stood firm. The sweat of years spent toiling the land glistened across his brow, yet he felt no fear, just a deep-rooted anger swelling within. This was his home, his legacy, and he wouldn't let anyone take that away from him. Sam's mind raced as he scanned the area, looking for anything he could use as a weapon. The shorter man slinked around to the side of the barn, and the taller one edged closer. It was then that Sam spotted it, a heavy pitchfork propped against the barn wall. Silent as a shadow, he reached for it, feeling its weight in his hands, a solid extension of his determination. "Leave now," Sam warned, his voice a low growl tempered with authority. The intruders laughed, but there was a tremor of uncertainty in their laughter. The tall one sneered, pulling out a crowbar from his belt. The moonlight gleamed off the metal, glinting ominously. "We'll take our chances, farmer," he said, lunging forward. In that split second, time slowed. With instincts honed through years of hard work, Sam sidestepped the attack, thrusting the pitchfork forward. Struck the ground just inches from the intruder's foot, the loud clank echoing off the barn walls, punctuating the peril of the moment. Sam shouted, primal rage and protectiveness surging through him. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. The taller intruder faltered, eyes wide with shock as he processed the farmer's determination. "You think you can scare us?" Before he could finish, Sam advanced, his rugged frame moving with the confidence and speed of a man who knew he had everything to lose. With another swift thrust, he jabbed the pitchfork in their direction, an urgent warning for them to leave. The shorter man, still creeping around the barn, took a chance, drawing closer to strike while Sam was distracted. But Sam was ready. He turned at the last moment, swinging the pitchfork with all his might. The clatter of metal met the intruder's leg, a sharp gasp escaping him as he toppled to the ground, face twisted in shock and disbelief. "Step closer, and I won't hesitate to use this," Sam yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He hadn't come this far to back down now. The tall intruder hesitated, glancing between his crumpled companion and the determined farmer wielding the pitchfork. Panic flickered in his eyes, and his bravado quickly dissipated. He shouted, backing up slowly, hands raised in surrender. "Exactly," Sam said, feeling the tension begin to ease. With hurried steps, they scrambled backward, the panic in their voices betraying any semblance of confidence. The tall one yelled, clearly regretting their misguided quest. They turned and darted, vanishing into the thick cover of darkness, their hurried footsteps fading into the night. Breathing heavily, Sam lowered the pitchfork, heart pounding as relief washed over him like a cool breeze. He had defended his home, but the reality of the confrontation settled in. He was shaken, yet filled with an unwavering sense of pride. Inside the barn, the animals stirred, sensing the tension had passed. The peace had returned, but the night felt different now, charged with a raw energy born from standing up to fear. For a moment, Sam stood still, anchoring himself in the familiar sense of hay and dust. Moments later, he walked outside, feeling the cool air brush across his skin. He took a deep breath and looked at the expanse of his land, moonlight draping everything in silver. The fields rolled gently, whispering secrets in the night, a testament to the years he had cultivated them. But this wasn't just about surviving an intrusion. It reinforced something deeper, his connection to this land, the legacy he defended with each heartbeat. He thought back to the stories shared among neighbors, tales of courage and resilience against adversity. He had not just fought to protect his possessions. He had fought bravely to preserve his history, his identity as a farmer. Feeling emboldened, he stepped back into the barn to secure it, checking every lock and bolt. Each click echoed with assurance, like a promise to himself that he would always protect what mattered most. As he moved purposefully around the barn, he decided it was time to make some adjustments. He would reinforce the doors, install extra locks, and up the security, his instincts telling him that fear shouldn't simply follow behind. Whispers of doubt flickered at the back of his mind, but he would silence them with action. The next day, as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft pinks, Sam knew he needed to share his experience. He headed to town, where the tight-knit community often gathered. As he told his story, neighbors listened intently, eyes wide with shock. They nodded along, feelings of shared fear and pride swelling among them. That's when Sam heard voices of solidarity. "We've all felt vulnerable at times," an older farmer said gravely. "But you showed them that we don't lead with fear." Each person shared their own stories of fight and resilience, and together they made plans. They decided to form a watch group, ensuring that no one else would feel alone against threats. It was a movement birthed from survival, transforming fear into strength. In the following weeks, Sam fortified his barn, but he also fortified his spirit. He took joy in small victories, the seedlings sprouting in spring, the rhythmic clucks of hens, and the gentle moo of cattle. This was life, rich and grounding, where every moment held value. Yet, the experience lingered in the back of his mind, a reminder of vulnerability and the importance of being vigilant. As days turned to weeks, the community looked out for one another, forging a bond that transcended the isolation of farm life. They installed lights around the properties, shared stories over coffee, and reinforced a feeling of safety woven through mutual trust. Then one evening, under a sky splattered with stars, Sam stood at the edge of his field, the weight of the world on his shoulders lifting. He had learned valuable lessons about courage, but even more about connection. While he remained the steadfast protector of his farm, he knew that being surrounded by a community made the load lighter. As laughter wafted in from the gathering, Sam turned back toward the barn, heart full. Each day was a new challenge, a dance of unpredictability, but now he felt equipped to face whatever came next. The barn, fortified and strong, stood tall against the backdrop of a vast sky. He smiled. The scuffle in the night hadn't just tested his resolve. It had ignited something greater, a meaningful network of farmers standing together. And through it all, he was reminded that in the darkest of times, strength doesn't merely come from within. It's bolstered by those around you, united in purpose, willing to protect what you hold dear. As the night deepened and laughter echoed through the fields, Sam felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Because on this land, every dawn brought with it a new chance for life, connection, and courage, a legacy written under the stars and etched into the earth. And he would stand for that. He would stand proudly. The crisp autumn air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and drying leaves. The sun had set, leaving the barn cloaked in shadows, only the faintest light spilling through cracks in the wooden panels. The old barn stood proud, a silent sentinel to the farmer's labor and dreams. But tonight, beneath the surface of this peaceful farm lay an unsettling tension that crackled like electricity. In the stillness, Frank the farmer sat on his porch sipping coffee from a chipped mug. He had spent his life pouring his heart into these fields, each row of corn a testament to his dedication. But there was a feeling tonight, a tingling in his fingertips, a whisper in the back of his mind urging him to stay alert. As he looked across the field, he thought of the harvest ahead, of the animals nestled in the barn behind him, everything that made this place home. But just then, an unnatural sound cut through the night, a rustle, a shift, like the wings of a hawk slicing through storm clouds. Frank's senses heightened. The wind carried traces of unease, a warning of what was to come. He leaned forward, staring into the darkness, aware that danger often lurked in silence. Moments later, two figures slipped from the tree line, moving with the stealth of a predator hunting its prey. Clad in black, they crept toward the barn door as if they were shadows themselves, their breath quickening with each cautious step. Frank's heart raced. These weren't just curious trespassers, they were intruders with ill intent. He set his mug down, every sound amplifying around him. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet, the rustle of clothing, the soft clink of metal as they produced tools that would serve their purpose. Frank's instincts kicked in hard. Images of his life flashed through his mind. The sweat of countless days under the sun, the sacrifices made for this land, it was all at stake. He had faced storms and droughts, but this was different. He crept quietly to the barn, his heart pounding, each thud synchronized with the tension building in the air. Inside the barn, he could hear their whispers, could feel the rising sense of dread that twisted in his stomach. "Grab whatever you can find, this place is loaded," one of them hissed. Frank didn't hesitate. His decisions were quick and decisive, honed by years of experience. He made his way through the dim barn, barely making a sound as he scanned the tools hanging on the wall. His eyes landed on a sturdy pitchfork. It would do. Gripping it tightly, he inched closer to the faded wooden doors, positioning himself in the shadows. He listened to their increasingly anxious tones, their bravado crumbling as they rummaged through sacks and crates. These men thought they could just waltz in and take what they wanted, but they had underestimated him. As they knocked over a pile of equipment, the sound reverberated through the barn, startling the animals inside. The pigs squealed in protest, and suddenly panic crept in, not just over the noise but in the intruder's eyes. The taller one barked, exasperation lacing his voice. Frank took a deep breath, channeling his father's wisdom about standing firm in the face of danger. He had always been taught that fear was just another beast to confront. He pushed the barn door open a crack, and in that moment, with all the strength and defiance of a man who loved his land, he stepped out into the light. He yelled, authority ringing in his tone. The intruders froze, wide eyes turning to face him as fear flickered like candlelight against their bravado. Their masks of confidence shattered. "Adjust, looking for something," the shorter one stammered, taking a shaky step back. Frank bellowed, raising the pitchfork. The feeling of empowerment surged through him, a rush of adrenaline spurring him onward. The tall one glanced at his friend, a fearful glint in his eyes. They hadn't expected a confrontation, let alone a resolute farmer with a weapon. We weren't going to stay long," he stuttered, hands raised, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Leave," Frank demanded, stepping closer, the pitchfork drawing a line between them, a barrier to protect the life he had built. Panic threatened to spiral in the intruder's eyes. With a final glance at the pitchfork and the unwavering farmer who held it, they began to retreat. But desperation bubbled in the shorter man, bursting forth in a moment of recklessness. He shouted, lunging toward Frank. That split second felt like an eternity. Frank's instincts kicked in and he sidestepped, thrusting the pitchfork forward with all his strength. It landed harmlessly but solidly against the barn wall, mere inches from the lunging intruder. A solid thud sent a shockwave of realization crashing through both the men. They were not simply robbers, they were cornered prey. Frank roared, steel in his voice. In that moment, the wind shifted. The intruders turned to bolt for the barn door, panic-stricken. But now Frank was energized, every fiber of his being fueled by the adrenaline coursing through him. "You think you can just invade my home and walk away?" The barn door swung shut behind them, and the tall intruder stumbled over his partner. They fell to the ground, scrambling to their feet, their earlier arrogance crumbling into sheer terror. The taller one yelled, eyes wild with fear. Frank moved forward, pitchfork at the ready, a protective bear awakening within him. With one last desperate glance thrown over their shoulders, the intruders dashed into the night, feet pounding against the gravel as they disappeared into the shadows from which they emerged. Frank stood tall, pulse still racing as the silence enveloped him once again. Breathing heavily, he lowered the pitchfork, adrenaline ebbed but his heart soared. The barn still stood, strong and unyielding, a fortress against chaos. He took a moment to gather himself, every breath a reminder that he had fought for what was rightfully his. But the sense of victory was mixed with a pang of unease. He glanced at the animals, still trembling from the ordeal, and he felt the weight of responsibility. He had not just protected his possessions, but had confronted fear itself. As the sun began to rise, casting soft rays of orange and pink across the horizon, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would not let this incident define him or haunt his dreams. Instead, it would become a part of his legacy, a tale of resilience and courage in the face of unexpected darkness. In the days that followed, he made changes. He installed reinforced locks on the barn doors and set up an alarm system. Reflecting on that night, he shared his story with neighbors, creating a bond that wasn't there before, a sense of community where they all could look out for one another. Gatherings took place, where farmers shared tales around flickering campfires, emphasizing the strength found in unity. Together, they established a watch group, ensuring their farms remained safe. The feeling of vulnerability slowly transformed into empowerment. Frank realized he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was involving a network of resilient souls, each with a story of bravery echoing through the fields and nights. One evening, as autumn settled into winter, Frank gathered with friends in his barn for a potluck. Stories flew over platters of food, laughter mixing with the scent of warming cider, creating a glow that warded off the chill. One neighbor joked, "Look at us now." Frank smiled, the warmth of camaraderie wrapping around him like a thick blanket. He realized then how something so terrifying had grown into something beautiful, a community born from understanding and unity. As frost started to paint branches with silver, Frank stood at the edge of his field, looking back at the barn, fortified and robust against the backdrop of twilight. He knew many more challenges awaited, as this life was never predictable, but he felt equipped to face them, fortified by the stories shared and the bonds forged in adversity. He took a deep breath, the crisp air invigorating his spirit, filling him with purpose. Life on the farm was more than just survival. It was about cultivating resilience, camaraderie, and strength. He would continue to sow seeds, not just in the fields but also in the hearts of those around him, nurturing a foundation of courage that would take root for generations to come. That night, as he settled in, he felt the soft stillness of the night embrace him once again, but this time it felt different. It felt safe, a reminder that light could overcome the darkest shadows, and hope could flourish even in the most unexpected places. In the heart of the farm, the barn remained a beacon of resilience, a testament to the spirit of a man who would always be ready to stand and protect what he loved. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the stars hung low in the deep blue sky, twinkling like distant lanterns. A tranquil silence enveloped the farm, but not all was as peaceful as it seemed. Just beyond the old barn, two figures crept through the shadows, plotting and scheming under the cloak of darkness. Jason, the farmer, had always been a man of the land, waking before dawn to tend to his crops and livestock. He knew every inch of this property, the fields that stretched endlessly, the rusted tools in the shed, and the corners of the barn that held years of memories. Yet tonight, that familiarity twisted into tension as he sensed a disturbance in the calm, a gnawing feeling deep in his gut. He leaned against the porch railing, coffee mug in hand, gazing into the stillness. But just as he savored the comforting aroma, he heard it, a faint rustle, the snap of a branch underfoot. He strained to listen, adrenaline spiking. Intruders, his heart started to pound. Who would dare to break into his barn? Glancing toward the structure, its weathered wood standing like a sentinel against the stars, he could see the shadows moving. Jason's instincts kicked in. He set his coffee down, every muscle in his body suddenly alert. This was more than just a potential theft. It was a direct threat to what he had built with grit and determination. He quietly slipped around the side of the house toward the barn, heart racing, each step deliberate and silent. The two men, oblivious to his presence, had managed to pry open the barn door. The creak echoed like thunder in the stillness, and Jason's blood ran cold. They stepped inside, whispering in low tones, their voices dripping with impatience and greed. "Just grab whatever you can find. We'll be in and out," one said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Jason's mind raced, considering his options. His father had always told him to face challenges head-on, to stand firm when trouble dared to knock on his door. He had spent years preparing for storms, and now he would have to prepare for this. As he approached the barn door, he walked quietly, his breath steadying with purpose. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just about protecting his belongings. It was about defending his life's work, his legacy. The air felt charged, like a storm about to break. With two swift steps, he positioned himself behind the doorframe and peered inside. The intruders were rummaging through various tools, their movements frantic as they searched for valuables. A wave of anger coursed through Jason. These men thought they could just waltz in and take what was his. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He turned to the left. There it was, a sturdy pitchfork leaning against the wall. It wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon if it needed to be. With careful precision, he reached for it, feeling its familiar weight settle into his palm. The pitchfork had seen its fair share of work, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. Jason stepped into the barn, the shadows swallowing him momentarily. He called out, voice low but powerful. The two intruders, startled, whirled around to face him. Surprise painted their faces. They hadn't expected anyone to be home. For a heartbeat, time hung still, a fragile silence encasing them. The taller one stammered, backing up instinctively. "Get out of my barn," Jason commanded, holding the pitchfork firmly in front of him like a defensive shield. Fear flickered in the intruders' eyes, momentarily stripping them of their bravado. They exchanged glances, hesitation creeping into their expressions, but it was short-lived. Jason's instincts kicked into high gear. He sidestepped the rush, swinging the pitchfork in a graceful arc that stopped just short of the man's chest. He growled. The tone of his voice was like thunder, resonating deep within the barn's walls. The men faltered, disbelief washing over them. The taller intruder gasped, raising his hands in a futile attempt to show he meant no harm. "This is private property." Jason's voice boomed with authority, the power of a man protecting his home. The realization that they were cornered took hold of the intruders. The weight of the moment hung heavy, and it was clear they hadn't thought this through. Panic coursed through them. The tall man pleaded, hands raised. Jason echoed, shaking his head in frustration. In that moment, the noise of rustling hay, the soft whinny of a horse, and the distant croak of a frog filled the air, amplifying the gravity of the confrontation. Jason steadied himself, powering through the unfamiliar weight of fear that crept into his core. "Let's just get out of here," the shorter intruder urged, glancing nervously back at the door. The tension escalated. Jason tightened his grip on the pitchfork, feeling every fiber of his being prepared to defend what was his. "You're not leaving until I say so," he declared, channeling the strength of generations of farmers who had endured their share of battles. Just then, a loud clatter erupted from the back of the barn. The horses stirred, a few whinnied nervously, and the sound of metal falling broke the stillness. The intruders jumped, eyes wide with panic, their bravado shattered once more. The tall man turned and bolted for the door. He shouted, adrenaline pushing him forward, but Jason wasn't about to let them escape that easily. With swift determination, he lunged, blocking their path just as they reached the doorway. The world outside felt like a siren call, but he wouldn't let them breach it without a fight. Jason roared, thrusting the pitchfork forward and jabbing it toward the ground with a forceful but controlled intention. The blade struck hard against the packed earth, creating a thunderous sound that made them shudder. In a moment of instinct, the shorter intruder aimed to shove past Jason, pushing with all his might as he darted left. Jason countered, twisting the pitchfork to trip him. The man stumbled, falling flat on his face, just as Jason took a step closer again, seizing control of the confrontation. Jason shouted, the fire in his voice igniting courage in his stance. "You wanted to take something from me." The taller intruder turned back, realizing his friend was down. Fumbling in panic, he backed away, stammering. "We didn't mean it. We'll go," Jason commanded, his heart racing, the tension crackling like a live wire. With wide eyes, the two men stumbled out of the barn, their earlier bravado stripped away, leaving only desperation. They dashed through the doorway, darting toward the tree line, and disappeared into the night like wraiths in the shadows. Breathing heavily, Jason stood in the barn, clutching the pitchfork like an anchor. The adrenaline still surged within him, though it began to ebb. The reality of what had just happened wrapped around him like a heavy fog. He had faced fear, confronted invaders, and defended his home, just like his father had taught him. The animals quieted as the tension dissipated, returning to their calm states. Slowly, Jason laid the pitchfork against the wall and took a moment to gather his thoughts, letting the calm wash over him. He was proud, not just of his bravery, but for standing up for his land. This was more than just a barn. It was where he had raised animals, where his crops thrived each season, where laughter and sweat mingled in the air. Each board held a memory, and he would protect it fiercely. But there were changes to be made. He knew the landscape of life had shifted. That night had awakened a part of him he had long buried under the weight of routine. He resolved to upgrade security, install better locks, and perhaps even motion lights to deter anyone daring enough to return. Days turned into weeks. As he worked under the sun, tilling the soil and planting seeds, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was ever present. He joined community meetings, sharing his story and forging connections with neighbors. They spoke of encounters with wildlife, of miscreants on four-wheelers, and they bolstered one another's resolve. For the first time, Jason felt a sense of unity blossoming among them. They watched each other's properties, established codes of communication, and began hosting barbecues, a way to not just bond but to ensure that everyone felt secure. One sunny Saturday, as he flipped burgers on the grill at a neighborhood gathering, he noticed something remarkable. They all shared stories of resilience, whether it was overcoming a drought, repairing fences after a storm, or confronting fears. Each tale built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of strength through shared experiences. Jason spoke about that night in the barn, about how the determination to protect led him to take a stand, and how it had rippled outward, uniting the community. "It made me realize," he said, voice steady, "that we are all stronger together than we are alone." Laughter erupted around the grill, echoing like music. It felt good, alive, like the heartbeat of their home pulsing with renewed energy. The warmth of camaraderie blanketed the gathering, and Jason felt invigorated. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting hues of orange and purple across the horizon, he realized he was never alone in this fight. Strength didn't come solely from bravado or pitchforks. It was rooted in the relationships they forged, the people who stood shoulder to shoulder when times got tough. Months passed, seasons changed, and winter eventually blanketed the fields with snow. Yet the bonds formed during that late summer evening remained strong. When a storm finally hit, Jason found himself not just battling the elements, but also grateful for the community that had come together to weather it all. Standing inside the barn, Jason gazed around at the animals settling into their cozy stalls, sounds of the wind howling outside. He felt a calm resolve, knowing that any future confrontations wouldn't come solely from his hands, but alongside the efforts of a tight-knit community willing to fight for each other. As the evening settled in, the barn stood firm against the storm, a symbol of resilience and a testament to a farmer ready to protect what he loves. With hope forging a path ahead, Jason was indeed ready, standing not alone but shoulder to shoulder with all those who shared in this battle of life and love for their land. The night was quiet, but in that haunting stillness lay a sense of impending dread. In the heart of the countryside, beneath a blanket of stars, an old barn stood resolutely, a stronghold of memories and dreams nurtured by hard work over the years. But inside that barn, tucked between dust-covered tools and the warm straw, trouble was lurking. The door creaked softly as two figures, cloaked in darkness, slipped inside. Marcus, the farmer, had lived on this land for most of his life. He knew every inch of it, the way the soil felt beneath his fingers, the sounds of the animals, and the rhythms of nature. But tonight was different. He had felt a strange unease vibrating in the air, an instinct honed by years of experience on the farm. Sitting on his porch, the cool breeze ruffled his hair as he sipped his warm tea, holding the mug like a lifeline. The dim light from the barn flickered, casting eerie shadows on the ground. That flicker caught his eye. Something wasn't right. With each sip of his tea, tension filled the air like a brewing storm. He set the mug down and stood, the wood creaking beneath his weight as he made his way toward the barn. The moon hung low, providing just enough light for him to navigate the familiar path. He could hear it now, the faint sound of voices rising above the hush. They were whispering, plotting. With each step, his heart raced faster. He couldn't shake the feeling that his home was under threat. He whispered under his breath. His instincts kicked in and he moved toward the barn, ready to confront whatever was waiting inside. As he approached the door, he peered through the gaps in the wood. Inside, two masked figures rummaged through his belongings, tossing aside tools and bags of feed as if it were their own. Rage and fear coursed through him. These men saw his hard work as nothing more than an opportunity for a quick score, but they had no idea what they were up against. Marcus glanced around for a weapon. Just to his right, a rusty pitchfork leaned against the wall. It wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of his relentless resolve. He grabbed it quietly, feeling its weight settle comfortably in his hand. Taking one last deep breath, he stepped inside. He bellowed, his voice booming against the barn walls. The intruders whipped around, eyes wide beneath their masks. For a split second, surprise flashed across their faces, but the tall one quickly recovered, breaking into a smug grin. "Just looking for some cash, old man." The audacity of it ignited something inside Marcus. He shouted, his voice steady and commanding. Fear flickered in the shorter intruder's eyes as he shifted nervously. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," he said, trying to sound tough but failing miserably. His bravado was thin on the brink of falling apart. Marcus tightened his grip on the pitchfork, ready to defend what was rightfully his. "I won't say it again." In a flash, the situation escalated. The tall intruder lunged forward, fueled by bravado. Marcus quickly sidestepped him, swinging the pitchfork with precision. It crashed into a stack of hay bales, sending them toppling over and filling the barn with a cloud of straw. Marcus shouted, heart racing as the intruders hesitated, momentarily surprised by the sudden reaction. Their facade of fearlessness was cracking. The shorter one grabbed a nearby shovel, clearly trying to appear more intimidating. He yelled, trying to mask his own fear. Marcus responded, his voice echoing with the weight of anger and protectiveness. The tension in the air electrified. Intruders exchanged glances, and Marcus could feel their resolve wavering. This wasn't a robbery anymore, it was a fight for survival. He was fighting for everything he held dear. He shouted, the words leaving his lips with a fierce urgency. With that, the tall intruder hesitated once more, grimacing as he struggled to balance fear and bravado. Marcus advanced with his pitchfork, ready for anything. In that moment, the ground trembled slightly, as if reflecting the charge of their confrontation. Outside, the gentle rustling of leaves turned into a harbinger of chaos, intensifying the atmosphere. The animals stirred in their stalls, sensing the tension emanating from the barn. Suddenly, the shorter man, feeling cornered, made a desperate move. He swung the shovel toward Marcus, who quickly ducked, the shovel missing him by mere inches. The sound of metal slicing through the air heightened the sense of danger. With fueled adrenaline, Marcus swung the pitchfork again, this time aiming to ground it between the intruders. The pitchfork struck with a thud, sending a wave of dust and debris swirling around them. It was a warning, a definitive line drawn in the sand. He shouted, his voice roaring like a thunderclap. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a protector, standing confidently in the face of adversity. Fear crept into their expressions, the bravado fading fast. They stumbled back, eyes darting as they realized they were not prepared for a confrontation of this magnitude. Forget it, the taller intruder yelled, turning to flee. Marcus shouted, unwilling to let them escape unscathed. The word retreat echoed in the air as they staggered out of the barn, panic driving their movements. Marcus chased them, pitchfork held high, ready to protect his legacy at all costs. As they crashed through the barn doors, the shorter one tripped over a loose board and fell hard, gasping as he landed with a thud. Marcus felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him, emboldening his resolve. He yelled, the familiar surge of power filling his voice. But the remaining intruder grabbed his partner's arm, pulling him along even as they stumbled into the sprawling darkness of the night. "Let's go," they shouted in panic, adrenaline fueling their desperate escape. Standing in the fading shadows of his barn, Marcus watched them disappear into the trees, his heart racing as triumph washed over him. He was shaken, breathless, and yet exhilarated. He had faced them head-on and they had backed down, but with the victory came a sense of reality. How easily their lives could have changed. He took a deep breath, letting the rush of emotions guide him back into the barn, heart still pounding. He felt the weight of his past in every creak of the floorboards, the memories of hard work folded into the barn's walls. He glanced around at the scattered tools, the toppled hay bales, remnants of the chaos that had just unfolded. That night had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, and he realized that the fight wasn't just about protecting the barn, it was about protecting his life's work and everything he cherished. The air felt heavy with remnants of adrenaline, and he could not shake the unease. Marcus grabbed a broom, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He needed to take action. After all, he couldn't let fear linger like a storm cloud hanging overhead. The following days turned into a flurry of activity. He bolstered security around the barn, tightening locks, installing motion lights, and setting up additional barriers to prevent intrusions. Each task was a powerful reminder of resilience, a reclaiming of his space. But it was more than just physical barriers. He needed to fortify himself mentally, too. He reached out to neighbors, sharing his experience, hoping to inspire them to do the same. They gathered in his barn for barbecues, swapping stories, fears, and laughter, creating an unbreakable bond. "We have to look out for each other," Marcus said one evening, his voice strong amid the chatter. As they laughed and shared stories of resilience and courage, a profound sense of unity washed over him. They weren't just individual farmers anymore. They were a collective force, learning from one another, growing stronger together. Weeks turned into months and seasons shifted. The barn stood steady, a symbol of their strength and unity, and the neighborhood community flourished. The landscape that was once marked by fear had now transformed into one filled with hope. As snow fell softly around the farm, Marcus felt a sense of peace enveloping him. He snuggled into his chair by the fire, warmth surrounding him like an embrace. The fire crackled, and he allowed himself a moment to reflect. The struggles, the victories, it was all worth it. He reached for a battered old photo album resting on the table, its pages filled with memories. Each photograph told a story of hard work, friendship, and the farm's spirit. With every turn of the page, he was reminded of how far they had come and the promise of what lay ahead. That night, as snow blanketed the land, he felt a profound connection to everyone and everything around him. He had changed, had grown stronger, not just as a man, but as a guardian of his home. With the dawn of a new day, he listened to the gentle rustle of the wind and the distant sounds of waking animals. The world outside was still, a fresh canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences and memories. And as sunbeams peeked through the windows, illuminating the barn's interior, he smiled. The barn had stood firm in the face of adversity, just as he had. They both knew, without a doubt, that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with courage, resilience, and an unwavering spirit. The journey had made him ready for anything, and he would never forget the night he stood firm against adversity, ready to defend what he loved most. His story was woven into the fabric of the land, enriching its history and forging unbreakable bonds along the way. And in that moment, he felt invincible. The night was deceptively tranquil, the kind of stillness that blankets the landscape just before chaos breaks loose. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sending echoes through the moonlit fields, while a hoot from an owl punctuated the darkness. In the heart of the countryside, the old barn stood sturdy, but tonight, it wouldn't be just another quiet evening. Inside that barn, the atmosphere felt thick with tension, like the hushed moments before a thunderstorm. Two figures, cloaked in shadow, slowly made their way to the barn door, hearts racing with a mix of adrenaline and greed. They could almost taste the promise of easy money. The farmer had left the barn unlocked, a perfect opportunity for troublemakers lurking in the night. Nearby, Tom, the farmer, was settling in for the night, but he couldn't shake off the unease gripping him. He had spent his life tending to these fields, and something didn't feel right. Since the sun dipped below the horizon, a nagging sense of dread had crept in. The rustle of the wind through the trees seemed to whisper warnings, a reminder that danger often lurked when least expected. With a determined sigh, Tom pulled on his worn boots and walked outside. The cool air brushed against his skin, carrying the familiar sense of earth and hay. As he approached the barn, he paused, his instincts kicking into high gear. What was it? That feeling in his gut, a somber premonition, urged him forward. Tom quietly ducked between the shadows, his heart pounding louder with every step. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of whispers. He edged closer, peering through the barn's cracked doorway. Inside, he saw the two intruders rummaging through his belongings, too careless and too loud for their own good. Their faces were masked, making them look all the more menacing. The taller one exclaimed, eyes glinting with greed as he tossed aside a rusted tool carelessly. "Just grab anything that looks valuable," his partner urged, more cautious, glancing around nervously. Tom felt a surge of anger wash over him. This was more than just a barn. It was the embodiment of his hard work, the dreams he had built layer by layer. Memories rushed through him, the smell of fresh hay, the sound of laughter with family and friends, the life thriving all around him. He would not let anyone tarnish it. Quietly, he stepped back, his mind racing for a plan. He needed a tool to defend himself, something to show them he was serious. He remembered the pitchfork by the wall, its handle worn but familiar in his grip. With resolve, he reached for it, feeling its weight settle reassuringly in his hands. Taking a deep breath, Tom re-entered the barn, the pitchfork held firmly in front of him. He called out, his voice steady and powerful. The intruders froze, startled like rabbits caught in the light. Their eyes widened behind their masks, but the shock quickly faded into bravado. "Having a look around," the taller man said, his voice shaky yet defiant. Tom narrowed his gaze, shifting slightly, making it clear he wouldn't back down. "This is my barn, you need to leave." The shorter one fiddled nervously with a crowbar, a sense of panic bubbling beneath the surface. "We don't want trouble," he said, though his voice betrayed him. Tom challenged, stepping closer, the pitchfork held threateningly in front of him. There was a fire in his chest, a fierce protectiveness bubbling to the surface. The tall intruder made a sudden move, lunging toward Tom as if acting on instinct. Tom sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blow. The pitchfork pointed the way, and without hesitation, he thrust it forward, jamming the tines into the ground just inches from the intruder's feet. Dust exploded, filling the air with a cloud that hung ominously between them. Tom yelled, the authority in his voice echoing through the barn, shaking even the rafters above. The atmosphere thickened as the intruders exchanged frantic glances, fear creeping into their eyes. They didn't expect a fight, especially not from a farmer. The shorter one hesitated, tightening his grip on the crowbar, his bravado cracking under the weight of reality. With a determined thrust, Tom blocked their path, unwavering in his stance. "You need to leave." The tall man stumbled backward, his bravado now replaced by desperation. He urged, glancing furtively at his partner, whose expression mirrored his uncertainty. But the shorter intruder wouldn't relent. He charged forward, fueled by adrenaline, ready to overpower the farmer. Tom anticipated the move, pivoting smoothly to the side, wielding the pitchfork with precision. He jabbed downward, the tines striking the ground just as the intruder lunged past him. The crash of metal against wood reverberated through the barn, and in chaotic moments the other intruder slipped, panic seizing him. Tom seized the opening. He shouted, aiming the pitchfork like a sword ready for battle. In that heartbeat, the energy of the room shifted. The intruders, once filled with arrogance, were now riddled with the fear of consequences. The tall one backed away slowly, hands raised in surrender, the spark of rebellion extinguished. We didn't know you were home," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. With the barn door behind them and a sense of impending chaos ahead, Tom pressed forward. "Get out." His heart pounded, every word a warning, every breath an act of bravery. The sound of hooves thundered from outside, a sudden rush of energy filling the air. Tom's horses whinnied, agitated by the presence of intruders. The taller intruder's face drained of color as he realized the atmosphere had shifted. He shouted, grabbing his partner's arm as they bolted for the doors. They crashed into one another, stumbling as fear propelled them into flight. But Tom wasn't finished. He warned, his voice strong and unwavering. The intruders fled into the night, disappearing into the darkness as their footsteps faded away. Standing tall in the barn, Tom felt adrenaline pulse through him, a raw mixture of fear and triumph igniting something inside him. He had defended his home, but amidst the victory, a nagging thought remained. What if they returned? What if they came back angrier? The confrontation had left him shaken. The events of the night felt like shadows cleaving to his thoughts. As dawn broke, light spilled through the barn windows, illuminating the remnants of chaos. Pieces of hay scattered across the floor, tools knocked aside, each stray object a reminder of the battle he had just fought. But it was also a reminder that he was vulnerable. He needed to fortify not just his barn, but his sense of security. He pulled on his work gloves, setting to right the mess that had been made. He secured the doors, tightening the locks once more. He wouldn't allow that feeling of powerlessness to settle in. Over the next few days, the memories of that night replayed in his mind like an unloved film. As he worked under the sun, tilling the soil, planting seeds, he felt the weight of vigilance settle on his shoulders. He could do more. Neighbors often walked by, and as they greeted him, Tom decided it was time to share his story. He wanted to create a web of protection, a community that stood strong together. They met for coffee, sitting around the rustic tables, the warmth of the sun spilling through the windows. "I had a break-in the other night," he shared one afternoon, his voice steady yet serious. "We have to be vigilant." The table fell silent, faces painted with concern. "That could happen to any of us," a neighboring farmer replied, shaking his head. From that day, a bond formed among the farmers, a network of care and protection weaving itself into the fabric of the community. They organized watch shifts, ensuring that someone always kept an eye on the shadows as darkness fell. But the urgency of the situation was not lost on Tom. He understood fear, and he recognized how easily it could swell like a wave. Despite the fear settling quietly in his heart, he felt stronger with companions at his side. They would turn anxiety into strength. But then, one evening, chaos struck again. Tom worked late into the night, the barn illuminated by a single flickering light. As he prepared to close, he caught a flicker of movement outside. His heart dropped as he recognized the silhouettes of two familiar figures creeping toward the barn again. Panic surged. He felt the rush of adrenaline fill his veins, his mind racing. They'd returned. He quickly grabbed the pitchfork, memories of the previous confrontation sifting through him like dry leaves. He could not let them succeed this time. He moved cautiously, controlling his breath, taking steady steps toward the barn door. As he inched closer, he raised the pitchfork, heart racing with every heartbeat, a primal instinct driving him forward. Would they come for revenge? Would they bring more than just themselves this time? With each creak of the barn door, the shadows thickened outside. Tom couldn't afford to falter now. He was determined to defend what was his. One wrong move could change everything. And just as he prepared to confront them, the two intruders stepped inside. They hadn't noticed him yet, crouching low, their eyes scanning for anything of value. The tall one whispered urgently, face twisted in both excitement and fear. With a deep breath, Tom burst into the light. The intruders froze, fear shooting through them as their eyes locked onto him. But this time, they didn't back away. There was a glint of something darker in their eyes, a determination to finish what they had started. Tom commanded, but their reaction was different. This time, they were ready for a fight. And just when he thought he was prepared for anything, they lunged forward, filling the barn with a rush of chaos once more. The confrontation had only just begun, and as the weight of darkness closed in around him, Tom understood. The battle for his barn was far from over.